Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a realm so forbidden, so wrapped in, state-sanctioned mystery, that for over 2 centuries, just crossing a specific line of longitude meant disgrace, ruin, or even death.
It's the ultimate cold case of civilization, really. What on earth happened to the Eastern Hemisphere after the Great War?
And we're tracing an adventure so audacious, it fundamentally rewrote the history of the 22nd century.
That's the perfect framing for it. Our source material today is the deeply personal and harrowing journal of Lieutenant Jefferson Turck. He's a Pan-American naval officer from the year 2137.
Right.
And through a just catastrophic series of failures, Turck accidentally stumbles across the 30th Meridian West, one of the absolute boundaries of his world.
And in doing so, he unlocks the savage, primal secrets of Europe, what they call the lost continent.
Exactly.
So our mission statement for this deep dive is, well, it's truly historical. We need to understand the significance of Turck's forbidden quest, map out the unique challenges, and, frankly, terrifying stages of his adventure.
And I think most importantly, extract the profound lessons he uncovered. The historical, the geopolitical, even the psychological lessons about war and the nature of civilization itself.
And just how easily savagery can take root in the ruins of a global superpower.
Before we get into the journey with Turck, we really have to set the context for you. Turck's world, the year 2137, it is defined by absolute enforced isolation. This came about after what he calls the titanic frightfulness of the Great War, which had concluded 2 centuries before his time. The Western Hemisphere, the United Americas, they spent years trying to filter news from the East, and eventually they just gave up.
They just cut it off.
They enacted a statute that became the defining principle of their existence. The East for the East, the West for the West, and a total separation.
And the result of that was the Pan-American Federation.
Yes.
It's this colossal fortress of civilization, spanning both North and South America. It's unified, it's immensely powerful.
And they essentially legislated peace, prosperity, and happiness to exist only between these 2 lines on a map.
The deadlines.
The deadlines. Absolute boundaries at 30 degrees west and 175 degrees west. Beyond those lines was just the great unknown. Wiped from the maps, ignored in history, forbidden even as a topic of conversation.
It was a conscious statewide erasure of half the planet.
And this barrier wasn't just geographic, it was ideological. For over 200 years, crossing that line was high treason. Turck notes that the Pan American Navy, which was the mightiest fighting force the world had ever known, wasn't deployed for conquest.
No, it was a police force.
Exactly. Its whole job was to maintain absolute separation. For 2 centuries, no one had crossed those lines and returned to tell the tale. The whole culture taught that stability, that peace, relied entirely on keeping that separation.
But Turck had a personal secret. He had uncensored family histories.
Right. He was a descendant of Admiral Porter Turck, who lived right as that isolation policy was being solidified, and his ancestor kept documents detailing 20th century Europe.
So this gave Jefferson Turck a lifelong, keen fascination with the very mystery his society was built to deny. So while his military duty was to patrol the deadline,
his intellectual core, his curiosity, was focused on what lay beyond it. So his journey, even though it was accidental, was almost like an intellectual rebellion just waiting for a catalyst.
And that catalyst, as is so often the case in these great adventures, turned out to be a simple yet absolutely fatal technical failure.
Let's turn our attention now to the protagonist himself and his vessel. Lieutenant Jefferson Turck is just 21 years old in 2137.
So young.
Incredibly young. He'd advanced rapidly in the Pan American Navy, mainly due to his inherited naval lore, but his command, the Aero Submarine Coldwater SS-96 class, well, it was a relic.
He calls it antiquated and worthless himself, doesn't he?
He does. He says it was only retained due to the government's world-old parsimony. They were just being cheap.
Understanding the Coldwater is, it's absolutely crucial to understanding the catastrophe that unfolds.
It is. It was designed for both air and underwater travel, and it relied on this incredibly complex machinery. For buoyancy and flight, it used something called gravitation screen generators.
So anti-gravity units.
Basically, yeah. Highly sophisticated anti-gravity, and these screens were the absolute pinnacle of Pan-American 22nd century tech. So when they failed, the ship isn't just stalling, It's losing the very technology that defined its civilization's superiority.
It's essentially reverting to a pre-flight state while caught in a massive storm.
And that's exactly what happens. While Turck is patrolling that critical 30-degree west line from Iceland down to the Azores, he hits the ultimate crisis.
Both of the gravitation screen generators fail at the same time.
Simultaneously. And Turck immediately remembers that the chief engineer had reported these very units as fatally flawed years prior. They had no reserve screen force, and the sub just begins settling slowly toward the violent, storm-lashed sea below.
And to make it all worse, the secondary systems start to go.
The whole thing just cascades. The wireless, which Turck notes was an antiquated mechanism, totally useless in their situation, it fails too.
So they're sinking, they're isolated, and most terrifyingly, they're completely helpless against this terrific west wind that is just relentlessly pushing them across 30 degrees west.
The immediate threat isn't even drowning, it's the absolute certainty of condemnation. Instant court-martial and degradation for the commander. The technology failed, but that law remained absolute.
And that structural unfairness just brings all the internal tension among the officers right to a boiling point.
Especially with Lieutenant Johnson.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dawson is 10 years Turck's senior, openly jealous of his rapid rise, and he's just watching Turck manage this initial storm with what Turck calls palpable suspicion and disappointment.
And Turck strongly suspects Johnson was responsible for the cascading engine failure that followed. The chief engineer reports numbers 1, 2, and 5 breaking down, and then shortly after, the other 3 just go out.
Johnson is the voice of that rigid Pan-American system, isn't he? As they're drifting completely out of control, Johnson openly demands that Turck's first officer, Alvarez, place Turck under arrest the second they cross that line.
Citing the explicit rules against high treason, it highlights the absurd cruelty of the system. It dictates punishment even when the crossing is clearly an act of God and a result of the government supplying them with dangerously faulty equipment.
The law is more important than justice.
Infinitely.
But this is where we see that profound moral conflict just rub. Alvarez, in this extraordinary act of profound loyalty and friendship, he doesn't arrest Turck.
No. Instead, he draws his revolver.
And he systematically destroys every single instrument on the bridge. Alvarez commits a capital crime punishable by degradation and death, specifically so that, in his own words, no other man aboard know it when they cross 30 degrees west.
He sacrificed his own life and honor, legally speaking, just to protect Turck's.
That selfless action just deeply affects Turck. It's such a powerful lesson in the difference between, legalism and genuine loyalty.
Alvarez chose personal, felt allegiance over the abstract, blind dictates of a 2-century-old statute. And that sacrifice, it sparks this existential revolt in Turck. It forces him to question the very foundation of Pan-American law.
Turck realizes the unrighteousness of the regulation and the blind faith in the infallibility of the long-dead framers of the Federation Articles. He is swept up in the spirit he calls anarchy.
A determination to resist arrest, assert his own command, and fight the senseless rules. He decides he's going to replace the instruments himself and personally announce the crossing to his crew, demanding their obedience until he can get the ship back to New York and force a confrontation with the Admiralty.
And despite his heroic efforts to rig a sea anchor to fight that west wind, the storm just rages relentlessly for 3 days.
When the sky finally clears, they confirm their position. Latitude 50 degrees 7 minutes north, longitude 20 degrees 16 minutes west. Unquestionably beyond the deadline.
So Turck announces this unjust fate, and he's expecting fear, maybe even mutiny.
But the crew, they've been moved by Alvarez's sacrifice and Turck's own defiance. They don't respond with fear, they respond with a roar of applause and loyalty.
They reject the unjust fate. They recognize their commander was a victim, not a traitor.
Right, and so the crossing of the deadline, which started as this unmitigated disaster, it transforms into a moment of collective moral liberation. Turck is now a commander defining his own justice, but he's also fundamentally cut off from the only world he has ever known.
And that psychological shift, that's what sets the stage for the real adventure to begin.
This period of moral victory is, it's brutally short-lived. The second stage of the journey begins with a renewed catastrophe, confirming that betrayal is far more dangerous than any environmental disaster.
After 2 weeks spent laboring over the engines and finding what he calls indisputable evidence they'd been tampered with, Turck felt it was safe enough to go look for supplies.
So he takes a small launch, the OA, with Alvarez, Delcart, and Snyder, and he leaves the jealous Lieutenant Johnson in charge with the specific task of repairing those gravitation screen generators.
A fatal decision.
Absolutely. They cite the cold water again, but it's airborne. Johnson, who had claimed generator repair was impossible, had somehow fixed both the engines and the buoyancy screens.
The vessel, full of men, just completely ignored their shouts, their pistol fire, and it sped away westward back towards Pan America.
A clear, coordinated desertion and mutiny. Johnson's intent was simple. Report that Turck had willfully crossed the line and then lost the vessel, securing Turck's disgrace and probably his own promotion.
So now they're stranded. Their only hope is the nearest land. The Scilly Islands and then England. Turck, relying on his ancestors' forbidden maps, he recognizes Land's End and the English Channel.
And he'd educated his men with the limited history he had, so they were expecting, remnants of ancient commerce, maybe some hospitality, a small surviving civilization.
The reality that greets them is a profound shock. It immediately contradicts 2 centuries of their civilized expectations. Turck motors into Plymouth Bay and up the River Tamar.
And instead of a city, he finds unbroken solitude. The coast is densely overgrown, completely silent. There are no buoys, no lights, no signs of commerce at all.
Turck realizes very quickly that the Great War hadn't just paused civilization there, it had annihilated the people who fought it, leaving the infrastructure to just crumble silently into dust.
And the archaeological discoveries they make just confirm the scale of this devastation. They're digging at the site of ancient Devonport, they find old clay bricks, remnants of the city, and then the chilling evidence.
A human skull with a neat bullet hole through it, and beside it, a metal spike and ornaments from an ancient German helmet.
I mean, that detail is incredibly significant. It proves that the Great War, which Pan America had always assumed was contained on the continent, had reached England's shores with astonishing brutality.
Turck speculates that this meant England was either temporarily conquered by the Teutons or that the invasion was just of such vast proportions that they had to make landings at many places simultaneously.
It shatters that 22nd century belief in the purity and isolation of English history.
But the reversion to savagery wasn't just historical and infrastructural, it was biological and terrifyingly immediate. While they're hunting near the ruined city, Delcarte encounters and barely survives killing this colossal cat.
The striped, feeless tigress of ancient Asia. A tiger in England.
This is a crucial pivot point for Turck because he's comparing this savage reality to his own, sterile world. In 22nd century Pan America, the remaining wild beasts were all contained in these frozen government reserves, just placidly observed by tourists.
And here, tigers, elephants, alphas, africanus, and lions, Felis leo, are roaming free. They'd escaped from zoological gardens and just bred prolifically for 200 years.
And the extreme boldness of these mega carnivores suggested a pretty devastating fate for the former inhabitants.
Turck's theory solidifies right there. The beasts had eaten up the inhabitants, establishing a terrifying new ecological order where man was now the most easily procured prey.
They were forced to abandon landing just to cook their food. They quickly name ancient Devon Tigerland. The scale of the war's aftermath had allowed the animal kingdom to completely reclaim its dominance.
So they move east, Turck can't find London, and the Isle of Wight is just as wild. But there, finally, they find people.
The barbaric natives, or Grabritins. These were hairy, half-naked, intelligent but primitive men wielding spears. They were the first indigenous population Turck had encountered in Europe, and they just represented the ultimate descent into savagery.
The cultural degradation is astonishing. It just illustrates the complete erasure of memory over just 2 centuries. They spoke a distorted form of English, and they named their island Grabritin,
which Turck painstakingly deduces is a corruption of Great Britain.
Right, and they exhibit absolute historical amnesia. They'd never heard of England or Germany. They believed the Great War was just their own petty tribal conflicts between Eastenders and Westenders.
And the societal structure reflects the depth of this reversion. They'd gone back to the lowest plane of human evolution. They were just hunters.
Their society was purely matrilocal. The family unit was mother and children, with descent through the women, because the men were constantly fighting these deadly duels and had no stable place in the family unit.
Marriage was unknown. They had no boats, no literature, no religion. Their only law was the law of might.
The loss of the concept of a father implies that the disruption was so profound, societal memory failed to pass on even the most fundamental human structures. They also practiced infanticide and killed the aged and unfit, grim survival strategies for barbaric existence.
Turck's departure from the Isle of Wight is marked by this real sadness. His naive expectation of finding some surviving pocket of civilization is just gone. He realizes the war annihilated not just cities, but human knowledge, language, and culture.
So now we're following him on this deep dive into the ultimate ruin, ancient London. Ascending the Thames, the sense of desolation just increases. London, the historical heart of the empire, presented the exact same scene of wilderness. Turck, navigating the river mouth, notes that where the world's commerce once centered, now only silence and decay reigned.
London Bridge itself was just a disintegrating mound of masonry, completely choked by the river and vegetation.
The wildlife takeover was total. Near the fallen city, Turck ran into this magnificent male lion, clearly the king of beasts, just claiming its territory.
Which confirmed his earlier theory. A wild beast monarch reigned where English kings had once ruled. But amidst this wilderness, they found something more complex than the isolated Grabritins.
Right. Near the site of ancient London, they discovered the Camp of the Lions. It was a large settlement, maybe 2,000 primitive people. And these people had reached a sort of wary detente with the wild animals.
They saw themselves as intruders in the beast's territory and made gifts to the lions just to coexist.
It's a society based entirely on fearful submission to the dominant predator.
And what's absolutely fascinating about this settlement is the physical archaeology of their dwellings. Turck observed that the older part of the camp consisted almost wholly of trenches.
A clear, undeniable survival of the military trenches from the 20th century Great War. These people were literally living in the remnants of the conflict that destroyed their ancestors. Their lives were physically defined by the very weapons their civilization invented to destroy itself.
Turck's interaction with these natives escalates when he rescues a beautiful, intelligent, barbarian girl named Victory from capture by hostile tribesmen.
And she, it turns out, is next in line for the quasi-royal house, which confirms that matrilocal descent system. The man who mates with the oldest female member of the royal house becomes the king.
Which brings us to the antagonist, Buckingham. He's the current king, described as a crude and murderous man who killed his predecessor, Wettin.
And Buckingham understands the social necessity of controlling that female line to legitimize his rule. He desperately wants to claim victory to maintain his power. This whole savage political struggle is being played out against the backdrop of a fallen empire.
But Victory, despite her primitive upbringing, provides the deepest insight into the historical catastrophe. She shares this very old legend.
A legend describing the men from the east, who came across the water, under the water, and in the air, bringing thunder and lightning and smoke that killed.
And they were eventually driven out, but they swore to return and leave no human alive.
Turck immediately identifies these mythical invaders as the ancient Germans. And this proves that the scale of the Great War had completely erased the name of the enemy from local memory. It was replaced with only this vague, terror-filled mythology, a testament to the psychological horror the war inflicted.
This prompts Turck's initial hypothesis, right? That the country was simply depopulated except for a few scattered, surviving children who just reverted to savagery.
It does. However, the source material introduces Professor Corcoran's counter-theory. It's a much darker vision that Turck only encounters upon his return to Pan America, and it challenges his findings.
Ah, yes, the asylum theory.
Exactly. Corcoran argued that the strong, intelligent English didn't abandon their children. They simply emigrated en masse to the continent, leaving behind only the helpless inmates of asylums for the feeble-minded and insane.
And Corcoran's suggestion was that the return to nature, over generations, had expunged the affliction, which would explain why the current inhabitants are mentally fit despite their primitive lifestyle.
This is a critical point. While Turck admits his profound personal prejudice against the theory, driven by the fact that he's falling deeply in love with Victory and refuses to believe she's descended from a gibbering idiot, the theory provides a chilling alternative explanation for the demographic collapse.
It forces Turck, and us, to consider the possibility of a complete societal self-purge driven by madness and fear.
The narrative reaches its terrifying climax when Turck is captured by Buckingham's men. He's tied up, dragged on this night march, surrounded by torchbearers and roaring lions to the Camp of the Lions.
And his fate is sealed. He is chained to a massive, crumbling arch, the entrance to the camp, to be left as a lion sacrifice.
And just before this horrifying execution, Turck learns from a child named Mary that Buckingham has killed the old queen, Victory's mother.
This just confirms Buckingham's brutality and heightens Turck's hatred for this savage king, just as dawn is approaching and the lions are ready to claim him.
And Victory is the only person who can save him. She kills the first charging lion with his rifle. They escape into a monumental ruin near the Thames, which Turck identifies as possibly the palace of the ancient kings.
And it's here Amidst rotting tapestries and murals depicting the lost 20th century world ships, trains, cavalry charges, that they make the definitive historical discovery.
They find the skeleton of an ancient military governor who died sitting at his desk 2 centuries prior, clutching a metal-covered diary. And this document provides the cold, hard facts that shatter 2 centuries of Pan-American silence and the natives' savage mythology.
The diary excerpts are devastating. The governor confirms the king had left, struck by the death, which is implied to be plague or poison gas. The city was suffering hundreds of deaths today.
And then the most crucial excerpt, "Thank God we drove them out. There is not a single man on British soil today, but at what awful cost." The English population wasn't conquered. They evacuated themselves to the continent, mad with fear of the death and rage at their enemies.
The final entry, dated August 1937, it solves the dual mystery of the fauna and the people. Alone. Only the wild beasts. I think the people feared the beasts even more than they did the death. All gone, only I remain. I promised His Majesty.
And the diary confirms it. The beasts were released, acclimated zoo exotics, and civilization's annihilation was complete and self-imposed, a legacy of war, plague, and fear.
Turck realizes the isolationist policy of his own Pan-America was a direct consequence of this massive, successful exodus of fear from 200 years ago. This first-hand account is critical. It moves the narrative away from simple military conquest and firmly roots the collapse in the internal failure, the panic, and the self-abandonment of the civilized world itself.
They didn't destroy themselves by fighting, they did it by running. Now armed with the truth of England's past, Turck and Victory have to confront the dangerous, unknown present of the continent.
And escaping London was an adventure in itself. They climbed down these massive ivy vines of the palace and swam the Thames, where Victory kills a charging lioness with her knife.
Which is such a striking display of her savage competency, isn't it? It contrasts so sharply with Turck's reliance on the rifle.
It is. And it's during this desperate escape that Turck's inexplicable moods and irritation finally resolve into a single feeling. He realizes the depth of his love for this barbarian queen, a love that contradicts everything his society taught him about superiority and proper hierarchy.
The emotional lessons here are sharp. Victory, learning about the difference between civilized and barbarian, she just completely challenges Turck's assumptions about his own culture.
She holds up their Grabritin prisoner, 36, as an example. She says, "Should you take that thing you call razor and cut the hair from the face of 36 and exchange garments with him, you would be the barbarian and 36 the civilized man. There is no other difference between you except your weapons."
And that just challenges everything Turck believed. His Pan-American civilization is suddenly exposed as merely technology, clothing, and institutionalized knowledge.
Stripped of his rifle and his naval uniform, he's just another man, and likely far less skilled at survival than the primal Grabritin. This philosophical confrontation, it elevates Victory from a savage princess to a figure of pure, undeniable truth. It just cements Turck's admiration for her.
So they continue the expedition. Turck, Delcart, Taylor, and 36, they cross the channel near ancient Ostend. And Turck, he's still clinging to this hope of finding German stability. He believed that German power, being so great, must have been victorious in the Great War and preserved itself.
But the reality is just crushing. Europe is an exact mirror of England, a howling wilderness. They motor up the Rhine, finding primeval forests, zebras and antelope grazing on former battlefields.
The utter destruction of the Great War extended across the entire continent. It leveled every building and allowed nature to fully reclaim the land. The civilized exodus was total.
And then the second, and much darker, betrayal occurs on the Rhine. While Turck, Delcart, and Taylor are out hunting, Snyder, clearly driven by lust for victory and a desire to get back to Pan America with the launch, he shoots 36 and escapes.
And 36's last whispered words are, "Snyder, they went back." Turck instantly fears the worst, that Victory, the savage, had sided with the traitor.
Turck's reaction really highlights the depth of his commitment, though. He feels rage against Snyder, but he notes this inability to feel rage against Victory. He's constantly searching for excuses for her indefensible act, all driven by his subconscious love.
And the discovery they make 2 days later confirms Victory's honor and vindicates Turck's loyalty. They find the launch drifting, and Snyder is dead from a stab wound near the heart.
Clutched in his dead hand is a strand of brown hair, Victory's hair.
Snyder's fate told the whole story. He attacked the girl, and she defended her honor and saved herself. This clarifies Turck's emotional situation, but his strategic situation is dire. They are stranded in the European wilderness again.
Their isolation is broken dramatically. While they're searching for victory, Turck is captured by uniformed soldiery, armed with rifles, revolvers, and sabers, but with faces as black as coal near the Rhine.
This introduces the unexpected third power structure, the Abyssinian Empire.
Turck learns they're an outpost of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, commanded by a Colonel Abu Balik. They are a Christian people who believe they're bringing Christianity and conquest to the benighted heathen of Europe.
The Abyssinians, particularly the patrician full-bloods like Dalik, are the new aristocracy. They have thrived immensely in the 2 centuries following the Great War's self-destruction of Europe.
What's so fascinating here is the complete inversion of the 20th century racial hierarchy. Whites are treated as inferior slaves. Their social plane is lower than that of even the lowest Abyssinian soldiers. Turck himself is immediately relegated to being Colonel Balak's slave and waiter.
The Abyssinians maintain this sophisticated, centrally controlled chain of military posts to enforce their authority in what they explicitly call conquered country, which is Europe. Turck observes that the black race has thrived far better in the last 2 centuries under their own color than they ever had under white domination.
It's a vibrant, literate, self-confident society, even if their technology, like their 5-cartridge magazine rifles, is inferior to Pan America's 22nd century standards.
Their empire is real, and it's built upon the ruins of the European powers who are too busy fighting each other to notice the change in the global power dynamic.
Turck is marched east for 10 days through ancient Germany, and he's observing these immense cavalry formations, horses, camels, even elephants used for transport.
It highlights the scale of their expansion and their military structure. They rely heavily on traditional transport methods alongside their limited modern weaponry.
And the destination is New Gondar, a walled frontier city built from the salvaged ruins of ancient Berlin. It is the new administrative and military capital of the Abyssinian expansion.
And Turck witnesses the arrival of the Emperor Menelik XIV in this barbaric splendor, riding in a golden howdah on an elephant. Turck immediately notes Menelik's features denote sensuality and cruelness. This is a sophisticated but brutal new imperial power, now controlling the very heart of the former German Empire.
So the stage is set for the final violent conflict in New Gondar, bringing together the American officer, the savage queen, and the new African emperor on the ruins of the German capital.
And Turck, serving as Colonel Balik's slave and waiter, he attends a banquet at the palace. It's a moment of intense humiliation for all the white prisoners.
The culmination of the evening is the presentation of slave women as gifts to the Emperor Menelik, all destined for his harems. As the slave women are commanded to prostrate themselves before the emperor, Victory, who had also been captured, provides the ultimate spark of defiance.
She stands, a single, straight, slim figure, and she refuses to prostrate herself before Menelik. She speaks broken Abyssinian but delivers this clear message of sovereignty and nobility.
She says, "I go on my knees to no one. I myself am sovereign in my own country." Her defiance isn't rooted in technology or law, but in the innate pride of a queen.
Menelik, who is more amused than angered by her audacity, just orders her taken away, intending to claim her, and this forces Turck's hand.
Spurred by his profound acknowledged love, Turck assaults the palace guard, bursts into Victory's prison room, and finds her struggling with the emperor.
The fight that follows is desperate and primal. Turck strikes the emperor repeatedly with a rifle butt and eventually seizes his throat with his bare hands, choking the life from Menelik XIV.
And then comes this incredible twist of fate, an event Turck might call divine intervention. Just as the Abyssinian guard bursts in, a shell from an unseen enemy bombardment strikes the palace and explodes within the chamber.
It destroys the entire guard detail and leaves Turck and Victory miraculously unharmed amidst the ruins and the corpse of the emperor.
In the chaos, the personal narrative reaches its climax. Victory reveals Snyder's treachery. He had lied, claiming Turck had promised her to him, which fueled her confusion and hostility.
And Turck refutes the lie and confesses his love, which Victory immediately reciprocates, sealing their bond right there amidst the wreckage of the Abyssinian command.
They escape New Gondar during a chaotic rout as the city falls to this unseen force. This leads to their final capture by the advancing army, which turns out to be a Chinese force, marching them toward a new city built upon the site of ancient Moscow.
And the Chinese Empire proves to be the second truly modern, enlightened civilization Turck encounters. They treat him kindly, and a high officer who is familiar with ancient history and Pan America takes an interest in his journey.
Turck is eventually commanded to Peking to meet the Emperor of China, who rules over all of Asia and the Pacific Islands as far east as 175 degrees west, the mirror image of the Pan-American Federation.
And the Chinese emperor provides the definitive, chilling historical analysis. He explains that the Great War didn't end formally. It simply continued among the European survivors until, as he says, there were none left to make peace.
And the final verdict on who won.
The emperor states it plainly. Pan America, perhaps, and China, with the blacks of Abyssinia. Those who did not fight were the only ones to reap any of the rewards that are supposed to belong to victory. The combatants reaped naught but annihilation.
The war didn't produce a victor. It produced an absence, allowing the isolationist, non-belligerent nations, Pan America and the newly rising Chinese Empire, to inherit the world stage.
This statement just completely recontextualizes the past 2 centuries of Pan-American isolation. It wasn't just cautious idealism, it was the ultimate, albeit unintentionally successful, survival strategy. The belligerents destroyed their own civilization utterly, leaving the periphery to thrive.
And Turck's journey had profound consequences back home. Johnson returned, but Alvarez's trial caused a massive popular demonstration against the drastic regulations.
Public opinion, revolting against that blind legalism, demanded action on Turck's behalf. It led to a fleet being sent to search for him and, crucially, the deadlines regulation being removed forever. Turck's accidental crossing was the catalyst for ending 2 centuries of isolation.
Turck and Victory marry at the Imperial Chinese court in Peking, which symbolizes this new alliance between East and West. Turck returns to Pan America a hero, finding his loyal companions Thalcart and Taylor are safe, and his legacy is immediate. He becomes the instrument for the uplifting of benighted Europe.
They are now inaugurating a new epoch for Europe. Turck and Victory are returning with Pan-American men and munitions, allied with enlightened China in the east and enlightened Pan America in the west, working together to regenerate the continent.
Turck, the rebel naval officer, becomes the bridge between 2 hemispheres, finally closing the chapter on the Great War's devastating legacy. So what does this all mean? Turck's journal serves as the ultimate historical cautionary tale. It bridges that hemispheric gap and proves that the world beyond the deadlines had reverted to primal savagery under the shadow of eternal, unpeaceful war.
He was the first modern man to witness the complete self-annihilation of civilization.
And we saw the confirmation of the Chinese emperor's observation. War brought annihilation to the combatants. The only functioning modern civilizations were those that stayed out of the Great War, Pan America and China.
Though we have to acknowledge the complex rise of the Abyssinian Empire in Europe, which shows that power vacuums are always filled, often by unexpected forces.
What stands out most for me, though, is the moral and psychological lesson. It's Victory's challenge to Turck. She asked him what the difference was if they stripped away his razor and his clothes, claiming his superiority rested only in his weapons.
And she was right, wasn't she? Turck, the civilized naval officer, relied entirely on his rifle and his cultural knowledge. Victory, the barbarian queen, she defends her honor with a knife and survives lions and emperors alike.
Turck's Pan-American society defines civilization by its technology, its governance, and its peace, all maintained by these rigid boundaries. But when Turck was stripped of his technological crutches and his government protection, what enduring quality proved most valuable?
It wasn't the gravitation screen generator, that's for sure. It was the primal loyalty of Alvarez, the ability to discern truth from the ravings of traitors, and the innate strength found in the savage queen he married. He needed the barbarian to survive the ruins of the civilized world.
It makes you wonder what elements of our own civilization we truly rely on, and which ones would just instantly melt away if the structures of law and technology collapsed. Is civilization merely the veneer of wealth and knowledge? Or is there an enduring essential quality that allows us to rebuild?
That is the savage secret Turck brought back. The answer lies in the human heart, not in the machine.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.